Hello, everybody. Happy whatever day it is, Wednesday, I think it is.
St. Patty's Day, so we're drinking.
St. Patrick's Day. Okay, thanks, Jim. I'm glad you reminded me. Thanks for Jim and for McAleese holding the event. Hopefully it's been a great event. Like a lot of you, have been to this before myself as in the audience. I even was in the Ed McMahon role one time. Sorry, Al. And so anyway, it's great to be here. I see that also we've had great speakers already. I see after me is Heidi Shu, who's wonderful. Can't tell you how much great stuff Heidi is doing. And then last but not least, Mr. Kendall, who of course we've all learned very much from. But I was wondering if this was a batting lineup and if Mr. Kendall's batting as the pitcher in the National League. Is that what he is or no? Okay, good.
For the first time in my life, I'm speechless. I just told him to bring the thunder.
Good. No, anyway, thank you. Thanks, Jim. Anyway, this is, I hope you've had a lot of good discussion on cross-cutting topics that are weaving together across the department. In ANS, as we implement the National Defense Strategy, we're focusing on three overarching priorities. Delivering integrated capabilities to our warfighters at speed and scale. Number one. Number two, protecting and sustaining the force. Number three, foster a resilient and robust industrial base. Those are three simple priorities. Doesn't mean they're easy. They're actually quite difficult, but that's the focus of ANS. Through this lens this afternoon, I want to hone in on some of the challenges as well as successes that we are seeing in Ukraine and what they may mean for other situations. How we're preparing the department long-term for the strategic competition of the pacing threat of China. And the overall shift away from a just-in-time mindset, something that is essential for the future fight. A little more than a year ago, Russian tanks rolled across the Ukrainian border as part of Vladimir Putin's special military operation. They expected to be in Kyiv in 72 hours. But as we've seen almost daily for the last year, the Ukrainians responded with skill and determination, and today they are still fighting bravely to defend their sovereignty. I'm sure it's been clear from every speaker today, alongside allies and partners throughout the world, we are working tirelessly to support the Ukrainians and provide the tools and capabilities they need to be successful. We are seeing true innovation on the battlefield, incredible innovation. New combinations of technologies and concepts are being developed and implemented, and the cycle from idea to prototype to a warfighter's hands to effect can collapse in months, even weeks, and in days. It's remarkable what we're seeing, but of course, that is to the credit of the Ukrainians and what they're doing. And as President Biden and Secretary Austin have clearly articulated, we are in this with our partners for Ukraine for the long haul. Between the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, which is used to procure defense articles directly from industry, and equipment provided from DoD stocks through the Presidential Drawdown, sometimes called PDA, the U.S. has committed more than $32 billion in security assistance to Ukraine just over the last year, $32 billion. Almost $4 billion of this USAI funding has already been awarded and is on contract, as well as an additional $4.3 billion awarded to replenish equipment drawn down from US stocks. So very quickly, let me summarize what this involves. In the supplementals, there's only three categories of items. There is the drawdown authority. It's actually not a pot of money, it's an authority to draw down. Okay, and that is typically, that is what has been announced almost every 2 weeks by the president. We're up to 30-something drawdowns. Of course, the advantage of the drawdowns is it can be done very fast. The other bucket is the replenishment for the drawdown. So if you take the drawdown amount and you multiply it by 1.1, 1.2, which is roughly how they cost it out, that is what's been provided by the Congress in the supplementals for us to replenish the stocks in the US. And that's where we've already awarded $4.3 billion on the replenishment. There's a third category, which is USAI itself. That's money that we can put on contract to provide a contracted action to the Ukrainians. Quick, decisive action by Congress and DoD leaders, like Doug Bush's Army ASALT, is accelerating, expanding production of key capabilities. This includes bolstering domestic production of 155 millimeter rounds by more than 500%, as well as invested nearly $250 million through Title III of Defense Production Act. And that's on things like to improve solid rocket motor capacity and broader missiles and munitions in the industrial base. And some of this DPA funding is going directly to subs. It's not going through the prime only. And the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, which Secretary Austin initiated, it's an extraordinary coalition of more than 50 countries, has committed an additional $20+ billion in security assistance, hundreds of tanks, thousands of armored vehicles, and vital munitions and air defense systems. And I should point out back to the contracting actions that the US has done for Ukraine. If you go to the ANS website, we have an update we update it every week with the latest contracting actions and the totals. So it's all there for you to see. However, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has also brought into sharp focus the importance of being able to surge production rapidly, as well as current challenges in doing so. As we all know, over time, the industrial base has prioritized efficiency over resiliency, and that was done with the government. It wasn't just done unilaterally. We've allowed production lines to go cold, watched as parts became obsolete, and seen sub-tier suppliers consolidate or go out of business entirely. While these were conscious decisions jointly made by the department and the Congress in the face of competing priorities, no one anticipated the prolonged high-volume conflict we are seeing in Ukraine, or that we might see against a strategic competitor in the future. Again, I point out the 1,155 rounds that have been provided over the last year to Ukraine. 1 million. I think it's important to start any conversation about where we're going with a little context of how we got here. During the Cold War, large defense budgets supplemented and subsidized excess production capacity, allowing us to surge production of critical munitions, platforms, and other systems in the event conflict broke out. As a reminder, with our defense budget today, we are slightly north of 3% of the GDP of the United States. Going back to about 1987, pick a year before the wall came down, it was close to 7%. And if you bring up World War II, it was above 40%. So just remember those numbers. However, after the Cold War, the decision was made to size those efforts and capacity down and give the American people a peace dividend. Those excess production lines were shuttered, and we shifted to a more of a just-in-time mindset, sort of the model that is epitomized by Walmart, just-in-time, use your IT to really drive down inventory and drive efficiency in the system. Fast forward to 9/11, and you can again see our shift in decision-making. Rightfully so, we prioritize the fight against global terrorism, which everybody can agree is a fundamentally different problem than the high-end, high-volume fight against a peer competitor. We can debate whether these decisions were right or wrong, but they were conscious decisions we made that led us to our current environment. It didn't just happen. Now we remain challenged by the tyranny of things like lead time, surge, numbers. Producing nearly any modern capability, such as the Javelin, Stinger, or the Gimlers, which is the 80-kilometer precision weapon that the HIMARS fires, still can take up to 2 to 3 years. And their complex production lines simply can't be turned on or off based on the requirements of the day. And of course, the same applies to the workforce. Industry has also rightfully remains reluctant to build additional capacity at risk until they have a clear, consistent demand signal or business case from the DoD. While I'm confident we will manage our way out of this current crisis, we cannot stop managing this once fighting in Ukraine ends. We need to change. So to ensure we pace the threat posed by China throughout the Indo-Pacific, we cannot return to the feast or famine behavior we've typically employed as the crisis comes and goes. So the questions are, how can we better incentivize the private sector to be more prepared for emergent national security needs? Again, they need to see the business case, they need to see the return on investment, they need to see some degree of confidence that if they invest, there's a good chance they will get something for their investment, not a guarantee. And of course, this is where we are especially focused in ANS and across the department writ large. In this year's budget request, which just came out earlier, I think on Friday and then Monday, we are continuing widespread investment to strengthen the industrial base, and Mike McCord probably talked about this. including roughly $6 billion into foundational sectors such as microelectronics castings, forgings, to facilitate overall industrial base resilience. In munitions alone, we're investing $30.6 billion in FY24, $30.6 billion. It's nearly a 12% increase over FY23 enacted. And compared to the defense budget request from just 5 years ago, we're putting nearly 50% more money into munitions. Our partners in Congress have been extremely helpful in granting us the authority to also execute multi-year procurements for our most critical munitions, and we look forward to continuing to work with the Congress to put this into action and ultimately send industry a clear, stable demand signal and the suppliers a stable demand signal. At the broader level, we must also account for increasing requests from allies and partners while limiting impacts to our own readiness. Without exportable inventory laid in, equipment will continue to be drawn down from US stockpiles during future conflicts. So we must make our systems exportable from the start. Given that munitions are often among the first bill payers each budget cycle, we have to find a solution to augment service procurements, something that would only further stabilize demand. In other words, if we can find a way to get funding to have higher production rates, even beyond what an individual service sees for its own need, such that we have hot production lines that can be used for FMS cases or surge capacity. How we can get that done is the problem. It's a problem statement we all agree on. We just need to figure out how to do it with the Congress. Ideally, though, we won't have to apply billions of taxpayer dollars toward industrial base modernization each time a crisis arises. A robust and resilient industrial base has hot production lines with a strong, secure supply chains. We have to build it so we don't have to surge and try to do this again. Those production lines allow us to deliver modernized capabilities to the warfighter at speed and scale. And the production lines themselves are a deterrent value. At the start of the conflict in Ukraine, ANS stood up a team of specialized munitions experts called the Munitions Industrial Base Deep Dive, or MID. They analyzed production status and capacity for key weapon systems, identified workforce parts obsolescence, supply chain, other constraints, and recommended quick paths to mitigate them. This team worked hard, days and nights, weekends. They're still doing it. They're incredible. Working with the services, the MID team channeled more than $2 billion of Ukraine supplemental and replenishment funding towards these industrial base investments. And in conjunction with other tools like DPA priority ratings, that's Defense Production Act, these efforts have expanded and accelerated production of key systems and munitions. Javelin, Stinger, and 155 are just some of the examples. They have been so impactful, we're now institutionalizing that effort in a permanent production accelerator. Instead of having it a reactive that stands up in a crisis, we're institutionalizing it and making it look forward and be able to do the accelerator what-ifs, including the costs on a variety of munitions and even beyond munitions. By continuing to leverage this expertise, analytical processes, and current authorities, our aim is to be less crisis-driven and empower a more proactive, forward-looking decision-making, and we want to do it with the services and with industry. The question we are now posing with this new team will focus on is how do we ramp production up and down more flexibly and cheaply in the future? For example, can we use advanced manufacturing techniques to produce metal casings in smaller batches quickly when we need them? Believe it or not, ball bearings are an issue. Can we find a way to cheaply print ball bearings, which are a critical limiting factor across the board in many munitions today? In other words, can we bring modern industrial and manufacturing technology into this problem, and we can be much more agile and flexible, including collapsing design and manufacturing together as we moved into this digital engineering phase. By leveraging this kind of innovation and enable flexibility, we can stabilize the industrial base and build it for the future and ensure we're delivering the capabilities we need. As part of the wider effort to support our common security in the future, us and our global allies and partners must also look for opportunities to more closely integrate our dynamic industrial bases and our armed forces. Because my point is that capabilities we need to deter and, if necessary, defeat our adversaries can't be produced overnight, and we can't rely on our exquisite prediction capacity. Secretary Gates often used to say, we had a perfect record of prediction when he was Secretary of Defense. We were 0 for 6. So accept that prediction is a best practice. Don't rely on it on how you do your planning. Plan for agility. And of course, the industrial base is a critical element of US power. It's a key enabler of national defense strategy and extends our advantage. But as Secretary Hicks noted earlier this week, If you add up the months DoD has been under a continuing resolution since 2011, it totals 4 years worth of delays. Delayed starts for new programs and delayed production ramps. We all know that. And if there was one thing I'd like to export, it'd be the CR process to the Chinese. To outcompete the PRC, we cannot have one hand tied behind our backs for months each year. And as we're seeing right now, money cannot buy back time. There's at some point, money can't buy back time. The department is mobilizing the defense industrial base in a way we haven't seen in decades, but we have to keep the momentum and maintain the sense of urgency. All American industry, small businesses, traditional defense prime suppliers, non-traditional startups, commercial firms, have a role to play in developing, delivering, and sustaining the capabilities described in the National Defense Strategy. I remain inspired by industry's ability to respond in the face of any crisis. Our industry are patriots. You all are patriots. You're part of our team. We say take care of the people, it's you. You are key. And always remember that, if sometimes we forget to say that. Thank you, and back over to you, Jim.
Yes, sir.
Where do I go? I'll do what I always do, ask Jim McAleese, what am I supposed to do?
Sir, just be yourself.
So you want me to stand here?
Yeah, we got plenty of time.
Okay.
We did have one
Housekeeping, and I did think we found the problem, the solution to the problem, sir. We found a credit card. So if you guys just check, it's at the front desk. We found a credit card. Just go to the front desk and you plan the credit card. All right. So just housekeeping.
Did you tell Mike McCord?
What's her? No, in fact, Carlos, the Navy Secretary, learned about it.
Yeah. There was softball right down the heart of the plate on that one, Jim.
You really struck up a nerve. What is the creature, you were passionate about the MiG. What is the new creature you stood up to facilitate that permanently? Who does industry need to go talk to? Right?
Erin Simpson.
Yes, sir.
Erin Simpson, Dr. Erin Simpson. Many of you know her. But we'll make sure of that. More of you know it. But it's basically, if you looked at any of these products that were going to the Hill or across the river or whatever for decision making on production and what could be done in production, it was all coming from these small team of 4 to 5 people.
Right.
You know, it's like the org charts where you see all this organization at the bottom, there's a little box that says me. It was like that was where they were. And we did the obvious thing, we're doing the obvious thing is really make this much more proactive and permanent.
Yes, sir. And is there a name for your team? Is it the joint production?
So it's the JPAC, whatever the acronym stands. Joint Production Accelerator Cell, JPAC. Of course, yeah.
I think Aaron will be getting quite a few calls tomorrow morning.
Well, let her do some work too, guys.
Yes, sir. Questions from the floor?
I will start with one.
Okay.
And this is a very simple one. But since you're responsible for acquisition, there's a lot of myths out there with acquisition. Can you talk to someone what are the biggest myths about the acquisition career field and acquisition process?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if it's a myth, but I think there's a perception because when you see the FAR and you see the 5,000 and you go and you look at a contract or whatever, you can instantly think that that's the actual acquisition system, and it sort of can be to some people. But really what the acquisition system is about, it's getting through 3 phases to get something to the warfighter. It's that simple. You got to develop a product, you got to produce it in quantity, and you got to sustain it. That's all we're trying to do, and it's got to be relevant to the warfighter. That is always what we're trying to do, and everything comes down to that. Everything in the FAR is trying to help us do that. Every rule that we have is probably because somebody did something that wasn't smart, and sometimes we have too many rules because there were a lot of things done over the years. But it's that simple. And these are dedicated people, and there's many of them are experts. If you're a PEO in the acquisition system, 35 years experience, you're a Jedi. You know contracting inside and out, you know the contractors inside and out, you understand production, you understand all these things. And so I think a myth might be just, it's not a myth, but how much of this is process? Because there is process there, but don't get fooled. There is hardcore substance here and engineering, and really that's what it's about. So.
Hi, sir.
Hi.
Thanks for your time. Scott Williams, Beehive Industries, small business, startup, additive manufacturing. You're kind of doing all of those. This morning, Congressman Whitman shared a story of how he was excited when he went out and saw an aviation organization printing parts. He saw the capability, and I think the capability is real, right? Expanding the industrial base, reducing costs, and accelerating the time of acquisition. However, in some recent conversations I've had with the senior service leaders in acquisition, some of the messaging I'm getting back over the 10 years of really additive is coming to the forefront is disappointment. And when I had direct conversations with the capabilities that our company can deliver, the question was kind of thrown right back to me that says, how do you solve the airworthiness problem? And so I think that I feel like there's this shared frustration with the technology of manufacturing and trying to bring this to market. And I have two questions for you. One is what do you assess, this new manufacturing capability within DoD and acquisition, and to get through this airworthiness process? And two, how can a small business that really thrives in our growth of getting this to market help maybe be part of this and collaborate in solving the problem of additive manufacturing and airworthiness?
Okay, let me try it this way. And I want to make sure I get to your second question, because that's actually the hardest one. And let's see, additive manufacturing. My view, the analogy would be 5 years ago, if you said modern DevSecOps software development, the way that, for lack of a better word, Google does it, if you said to a typical defense weapon system expert, you can do this on your weapon system, they would say, not always, but the majority would say, that's fine for Facebook or Google, but not for a mission critical system like this. They're wrong. I don't think they're saying that anymore. There was a change had to happen. I think what's also happened in 3D manufacturing and printing is it has changed. When it was first introduced back when you first started seeing a lot of it, 2012, and the pop-up stores were showing up everywhere, people were still trying to figure out what it could do. Was it just to design a prototype? Is it to help you kind of size something? And at that time, I remember when people were even coming and saying, I think it could do parts for this engine, and then the airworthiness stuff would come up. That was sort of where things were maybe in 2012, 2013. It is not where things are in 2023. In 2023, additive manufacturing is doing everything across the board in the auto industry. In fact, I don't know if it's launched yet. There's supposed to be a launch of a solid rocket motor additive manufacturer from the Cape like today. It is real now, and it's in real places that are mission critical. So in fairness to the airworthiness people, they tend to be conservative because of their background, but I firmly believe that you can do airworthiness 3D printing. I absolutely believe it. It's a culture shift. It's just like the software. And so just like software, it's going to take some persistence. And also it's going to take people that be able to learn. Because if your image of 3D printing is from 2012, that's fine. But get current on it, because it is not that way anymore. Now for you, what I would encourage is we're trying to find in this advanced manufacturing and new ways to do manufacturing and new ways to do sustainment, we're trying to find new ways to get contracts out. I will tell you right now, and for everybody, the Ukrainians are doing 3D printing right now for parts on the M777 and some of their tanks. They're doing it right now. You tell the Ukrainians it's not working. So it is real, it's with us. And I think what we need to do is find ways to get your companies with your capability into the system. And the other piece, I would focus on something, put the airworthiness aside, focus on other things. Airworthiness is a pretty high standard in a very conservative community for good reason. That's what I would say. Hi, Susan.
Hi. We heard a lot today about interoperability and interchangeability.
Right.
Being a joint with our allies in a forward course. And now I've heard you speak earlier in other events about simplifying FMS.
Right.
So we can get that capability out there.
Right.
And then tying in today with what you're talking about sustainment. A lot of these systems that are FMS really have to do with the electromagnetic spectrum. They hold threat data. And these systems have to be brought back on U.S. soil to be sustained and maintained. In many times. So are you guys reimagining how we can work with our allies or our most trusted allies in their country and sustaining these types of systems versus bringing them back home, because it's causing this incredible time, right, for them to be able to maintain the systems and getting them back and forth on U.S. soil.
Boy, where do I want to start? Improving the FMS process is such a target-rich environment. Okay, so what you brought up is absolutely part of what needs to be addressed, which is what she's talking about are typically mission data files, they're called, which are very threat-specific. And so if we have an FMS case even approved with another country and the threat changes, like the threat changes, or something needs to be updated, what you're describing is it has to be shipped back to the United States. It's very laborious and the rest of it. We have to move towards it, that can be done on a network. We do have classified networks, okay? And we have to do that. I was visiting a country a couple weeks ago. This specific issue came up about sharing of data and can we do this in country, and we're working on it. But if you think that is the only part of FMS, there's so many other things we have to improve. That's one of them. That's in the class of build for exportability right from the beginning and sustainment from the beginning. That's what that is. So let me give you the principles of what we have to do in FMS. And it's going to be out by the secretary is going to be announcing some of the actions. It's number one, we want to get from letter of request to letter of approval as fast as possible. Streamline that process. Number two, we want to build for exportability and at the very beginning for these kind of issues. And that's going to take funding, and it's going to be a different mindset. And it's going to take anticipatory building. Because remember, we may not have the FMS case yet. Which leads to the third part, is we got to get the production lines up and faster. Because I can't tell you how much of the production lines are part of FMS. Not because the production lines are slow necessarily, it's because if you get a new FMS case, you get to the back of the line. I'll give you a counterexample with F-35 of all platforms, a positive example. The Finns got a letter of approval in February of 2022 for 64 F-35s. The JPO was able to get it into the lot 15 through 17 negotiation handshake agreement that happened last summer. They're going to get their airplanes in like 2 years. Why? What was different? Well, it's one of the few production lines that we have that's going very high. So you have the flexibility to move things around. So it gets back to what I said in my talk. We're trying to work with the Congress to let us get some of these production lines higher without having the exact signed, sealed, delivered case that will be on the service, because we know this bow wave is coming and it'll actually speed things up. A large part of the backlog for Taiwan that's been talked about by Representative Gallagher, it's a $19 billion FMS backlog. 16 billion of it is the production line of the F-16, getting that faster, and the production line of Harpoon. That's 16 billion of the 19. So anyway, it's all part of the same issue.
Hi, Eric.
Hi, Eric.
We spoke about Title III, and I know castings and forgings are a critical area for that. For a subsystem component supplier who's having a bottleneck in that issue, is OSD more interested in having a supplier vertically integrate or partner with an existing forge or foundry to build more capacity?
I personally don't think I have an opinion on whether vertical integration is or is not the way to go. I think health is what we're trying to get. I could see a case where vertical integration would help. I could see where it could hurt. So I don't know that we have a position. I think what we'd have to look at is a specific scenario and say, would vertical integration help this or not? That's all I would answer. It's just like competition or mergers and acquisition. You have to look at the case itself.
Thank you. So we've got maybe one last one. Shoot.
Secretary of Plant, my name is Eric, also a lawyer in private practice. Previously, I was a lawyer at OSD.
You admit to both of those. My wife's a lawyer, but she hasn't worked in OSD, at least.
My question is this. I'm very aware of installation issues.
Yeah.
I'm aware of the water contamination issues that at Camp Lejeune and other locations. I was wondering if the department had taken a position yet on the new EPA rule on PFAS, because that's an issue that certainly cost the department a great deal of money.
No, thank you for the question. It's a very serious question, and I think it was earlier this week that the EPA made the announcement of the new standard for PFAS that's going to be out to the public, and I think there's a public commenting time and all the rest of it. In general, I would just say this without making, I'm not going to make any announcement today, but generally historically we tend to follow the EPA's lead. I don't know that we've been public yet on this particular one, but certainly we're in consultation with them. And it's these, I think we have a systemic effort led by Honorable Owens, who's my Assistant Secretary for EI&E. It's sort of like the munitions thing, is get out of the reactive posture on these forever chemicals and start designing from the beginning some type of, they call it circularity, but basically identify ahead of time what are forever chemicals, whether they're deemed as harmful or not. Don't do forever chemicals, period. And so we have a systemic effort to do that, but we have a lot of work to do. And I think, and I think more of the American public are going to also hear about it, hence the EPA announcement. Thank you.
Sir, one last one. We're just running out of time. Over here, sir. I'm sorry. I'm hiding over here. I promise you, if we made it quick, we could fit it in.
Sir, John Turbat here at Space Forces Magazine.
Hi, John.
How much are we going to go back to the future, to the lessons of the 80s and Cold War, in terms of production and competition? Thinking of the Great Engine War, the Air Force just passed on the opportunity to do a competition between two engines for F-35. Is that too complicated, or are we only thinking about more simple things like munitions, or is it going to be radars and engines, things like that?
It's a great question, John. And by the way, I have enormous respect for John. And I hope I don't mind, I relay to everybody. John was at the rollout for the B-21 out in Palmdale in December. And he casually said to me, yeah, this is sort of like the B-2 rollout. This is different. I go, you were here for the B-2 rollout? He goes, yeah. That's John. He knows that. He's been everywhere. Really great guy. John, it's a great question. I think what's going to happen is we're going to, for all of these resiliency issues, whether it's redundant production lines or other things like that, we're going to have to cost them out. And we're going to have a very interesting conversation, I think, with the American public and the Hill. Because no matter what you do, when you look at many of these anti-resiliency concepts, not all of them are free. In fact, many of them are not. Because again, you're not doing the just-in-time anymore. You're not doing the only one supplier anymore. So I think it's going to depend on the business case. What we're trying to do is get that production resiliency at an economical price. And so solutions like having multiple engine developers and producers, I'm sure will be one that we looked at, but we'll look at other ways to do it. And again, we're all hopeful that there might be a change with the technology that may help us on cost. Yeah.
Thank you, Secretary LaPlante. I understand you've agreed to have a press meet the press, but I'd like to say thank you for your insight. Thank you for what you're doing for the department. I'm glad to call you friend.
Thank you, Al. Thank you, Al.